Hello and good evening, everybody. My name is Shilby. I'm one of the many organizers for tonight's event. And before we kick off with the official programming, I would like to introduce you all to Bear Standing Tall, who will lead us through an opening ceremony, a land acknowledgement, and a drum song. And Rocky, if you'd like to come on stage, I would. On behalf of all of us here today, the panelists, the organizers, and the audience, offer this tobacco being here today, being present, and for sharing your wisdom.
My relatives, I'm so humbled to be asked to come here today and do an opening prayer and to do a drum song and to do a traditional land acknowledgement. It brings greatest respect and joy to be part of something this beautiful, to be able to be part of that medicine that brings us all together, part of that healing and medicine that helps us to go down deeper and take a deeper look at how do we work together. It's like for the indigenous worldview, it's like the sacred Hoopidan nation is stronger when we unite. So before I begin, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and most recently the Mississaugas of the New Credit. The territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. This territory is also covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. Today, the meeting place of Toronto, which comes from the Haudenosaunee word Toronto, is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. And we are grateful to have this opportunity to work in this community on the sacred territory. All my relations. So when we acknowledge the Indigenous people that have been here since time immemorial, I like to acknowledge the ancestors that have been here, that are in the spirit world also. And when I do that, I use medicines and I use an eagle fan because the eagle flies the highest. So I'm going to be using my drum, the sage medicine, and that eagle fan to communicate with the spirits, our relatives that are in the spirit world. And I'm going to give thanks. I'm going to give thanks for every little thing that I can think of, especially the sacred gift of life that we have. And when I do this work, I use this medicine that's called sage. And smudging has been done for tens of thousands of years all over the world. It's nothing new. We've always done smudging all over the place. And so when we go back to when we use these medicines, we're actually like making a portal to the spirit world and we're giving thanks. And then I'm going to pray in my language, my mother tongue, which is Nahio or Cree. gotta give thanks to our elders. The rocks have been here before human beings. Trees have been here before human beings. The water and the air. So we have to give thanks to everything that we have all the time. Say thank you, Great Spirit, for this beautiful day. I ask you, please, I ask you to always protect the children and the unborn children, because they're the ones that are going to be looking after us and when we get older. So I say thank you, Great Spirit, for all that you provided, all my relations. Thank you.
Thank you, Bear Standing Tall. It's such an honor to have you start off this evening. And I know we just did this, but I'd love to give you one more round of applause. Good Good evening. My name is Adil Dalla, and I'm the Executive Director for the Center for Social Innovation.
My name is Shelby. I'm one of the organizers for How to Be an Ally.
On behalf of the team and the board at the Center for Social Innovation and our sister charity at the Social Innovation Institute and our How to Be an Ally co-creator, Rania El Mugammar, welcome and thank you for being here tonight. For the last 14 years, CSI has been working for and with our community of artists, activists, entrepreneurs, and innovators to contribute to a world where we put people and planet first. Most people know us for our spaces, like CSI Regent Park upstairs, but our greatest strength is our community, whose diverse work is built on a shared foundation and belief that we can and need to do better. We are privileged to serve and support this community, and in some cases, partner with them.
And tonight, we want to honor two members in particular. They're standing tall, and Rania El Mugammar. They are the co-creators of How to Be an Ally program. And starting in the summer of 2016, close to 1,000 people have attended their workshops on topics such as anti-oppression, Islamophobia at the intersections, Black art and liberation, indigenous protocols, and reconciling 150 with indigenous calls to action. Tonight's event on anti-blackness at the intersections has been specifically led by Rania El Mugammar, who is an artist, equity consultant, and trainer, who is a relentless advocate for Black communities. She has continually challenged us to host important conversations like this in the CSI community. This event and How to Be an Ally program would not have been possible without Rania's leadership. So we are eternally grateful for you, Rania. There are a few housekeeping items. So first, the delicious food was made with love by the Regent Park Catering Collective, a social enterprise from the neighborhood. There are 12 Black art market vendors tonight, so if you haven't had a chance, all gender washrooms are found on.
You hold your applause until the end, and we'll just aggregate our applause into one big one. First of all, I want to acknowledge the many volunteers who have made tonight possible. Our moderator, Elisa Smith, and all the panelists, Ian Kamal, Huda Hassan, Kim Ninkuru, Zinduru, Just John, and all of them will be sharing their stories around racism, resistance, and resilience around anti-blackness, and we thank them for their courage in sharing their stories today. There also have been many other educators who have been a part of the How to Be an Ally program, and whose future workshops are listed in the program. And thank you to Jermaine Henry, Denise Booth McLeod, Jaleesa Luces Mendez, and Samson Brown. We'd also like to acknowledge the Toronto for Everyone donors, Canadian at Heritage Canada, and Showing Up for Racial Justice for their collective financial contribution that enabled us to ensure tickets are free tonight. We'd like to also recognize Artspace for the space and staff support, Issa Ransom for live streaming, our ASL interpreters, How Hearing Solutions, and finally the Regent Park community and all of you, our audience, for investing your time and for listening.
So while we were working on this event, Adil and I were reflecting on our moments of anti-blackness in our communities, and realized how pervasive and nuanced it is. Speaking personally, I remember the first time Rania held a workshop on shadism, and realized that shadism is a form of anti-blackness. Why is it that in my Korean community, light-skinned is considered beautiful and darker-skinned is not? Or how some Asian pop artists take and make
take
money off of
and make
black
money
culture.
off of black culture.
And yet we don't check
And
ourselves,
yet we don't check
with our
ourselves
language and our
with our
behavior
language and our
towards black
behavior
communities.
towards black communities.
Or the number of
times we
share
share stories
of our parents not
accepting
black
black partners.
But we're not having
But we're not having courageous conversations with them either.
letting things slide,
Being complacent, not being honest.
I've been part of the problem.
I've been part of the problem.
And I have as well. And I have as well. What's hard to confront is not what's out there, but what's within. Our unconscious biases, or making quick judgments on people based on their race without us realizing. We're pretty good at seeing blatant racism, but we're not as good at identifying unconscious ones, the nuance and pervasive racism that is all around us. It's that little voice in your head that's your unconscious bias at work. These unconscious biases can harm black individuals and communities. And folks, the thing is, if unconscious biases can be learned, we believe that you can unlearn them. Tonight, we will listen to the panelists and have an honest conversation with them and with ourselves, so that we can soon have the honest conversation with the people around us. So we sincerely thank you for all being here tonight, taking the time to listen and to learn. And I would now like to introduce Joshua Scribe Watkis, storyteller through the art of hip-hop and spoken word, to the stage.
Evening. That was really quiet. There's black people in this room. That surprises me. Good evening. All right, cool. So we're just gonna do a couple things quickly. If you've ever listened to spoken word live, you know that it's a black art form, which means we gather energy from each other, which means I'm gonna pour my heart out, which means I expect you to also pour your hearts out. If you have a hand attached to your wrist, attached to your arm, attached to your torso, could you just raise it real quick? Cool. Plenty of them. Just take your middle finger and your thumb. And just give me a little. Beautiful. All right, that's mad conservative. If you feel so inclined to be a little less conservative, if you have a foot attached to your leg that you can stomp, feel free to stomp it. If you've ever tasted a Popeye's biscuit, and know what it feels like to have soul food touch your arteries as well as your soul, then just give me a I like it. Cool. I'm gonna do a poem now. I know you remember it. Your second birth. The first time it felt like your bedroom or basement or elementary school stage became Broadway, and the whole universe was watching. Planets crammed into the stands, stars stuffed like tissues into the nosebleeds, and while the world had told you that you couldn't do what you wanted to, the arts had taught you that you were made to make your imagination dance in the land of the living, but the industry you're in tends to see you and stop giving. So this is to all of my people, sitting in the audition room, skin the color of oil and freshly soaked soil. I get it. I didn't want to play Jamal the drug dealer or gangster number 5 either. I feel my own lungs scream when you say that you need a breather, a break from stuffing your talent into caricatures instead of characters. I feel my own stomach turn when it feels like you don't get a spot, like there's only a single slot for color on their cast palette. I remember waiting rooms, white boys crammed in like sardines, Quincy and I, the 2 black kids, knowing only one of us had a shot. I remember quitting at 14 because my dignity meant more to me than a check. And whenever directors would check for me, I barely felt basic human respect. Little did I know, my toes were barely being stepped on. See, no one told me how Hollywood used to exclude us altogether, how to them, white has always been Genesis, canvas, The standard that gave color, context, and definition. How even today, the blank slate for the everyday character stays Caucasian. Stealing away the freedom given to us by our imagination, but to my people, dying to see themselves represented. Remember those who have come before and gone ahead. Writers, actors, and directors who took empty roles and wrote with them until they could hold their own pens with no strings attached, so we could finally tell the tales they wanted spoken, so we could finally see a future with no more tokens, no more tricks, candid flips of their scripts to appeal to their shit, no more fearing the fallout of telling the stories we birth ourselves, no more taking their lenses to our cameras, their angles to our vantage. They can't see the shit we see. Can't breathe the air we breathe. They make it seem like we just human on screen. We extraterrestrial, extraordinary, just extra. And they can't capture it. No matter how wide their shot gets, we shoot deeper, cry further. Playing like death was waiting to pick us up. Once we touched the sidelines, we rewriting life into manuscripts for our people to wear like bionic costumes. So no more tropes. No more jokes where our humor is the punchline to bring theirs back from the flat. No more dead atmosphere. We are not spare sacrificial meat. We are core characters with character, with substance. Our stories don't need wealth to work out the worst in us. Flex in our faces, make light of our pain in the nighttime, then laughingly bring it into the sunshine. So we don't scared to take risks no more. No more Colombian cocaine, colored carbon copies, just black like oil, like freshly soaked soil, space itself expanding across our skin, giving our stars a chance to shine. We will tell our stories our way. No more La La Land. No more La La Land. We're going to shine in our own right. Even in the darkness. Even in the moonlight. Peace.
Okay, so let's get right into it. First question is, what is anti-blackness? How do we define it? What is anti-blackness to you?
Do you want me to start? Because I feel like you're looking at me. Maybe I want you to be looking at me. I think, honestly, for me, anti-blackness is the air we breathe. It's the water that we live in. It's the system of the world that we live in. It's the most accessible currency of white supremacy. Everybody trades in it. I see it all the time in all kinds of spaces, even pro-liberation and so-called progressive spaces. Anti-blackness is something everybody deals in every community, and of course the context around it is different. For me, as a Sudanese woman, constructing blackness wasn't necessarily constructed against whiteness in the same way that it was in the West. There's a history of Arab colonialism, so that adds a dimension to my understanding of blackness in the context of my community. Honestly, anti-blackness is just the way of the world. It's the way of the world.
Anti-blackness is the devaluing of black people. Not just devaluing them, us, on an individual level, but also systemically. It is a lack of value in ourselves, in our culture, in our perspectives, in our intellect, in our creativity. Economically, it manifests itself in a variety of different ways. And I agree that it's pervasive in relationship to white supremacy, certainly, but not exclusively in white supremacy. It's steeped in many cultures around the world for a very long time.
Anti-blackness is a violent state logic. It's a colonial project. That's rooted in the Atlantic slave trade. It's rooted in specifically in the Barracoons, the slaveholds, plantations of the Middle Passage. But it continues to haunt us to this day. It's a 500-year-old project. It's transnational. It's continuous, and more importantly, it's deadly. I just wrote down a couple of things. Anti-blackness is colonization. It's Atlantic slave trade. It's slave auctions in Libya. Continued anti-black legacy in North Africa. It's SROs in black-populated TDSP schools here in Toronto. It's Donald Trump's Muslim ban. It's Western media ignoring when 500 Somalis get murdered in Mogadishu. And it's over all these white times.
I'd say that I would echo Rania saying in terms of anti-blackness being just the way that the world like generally works. Like nothing is exempt from anti-blackness. Pretty much. And I really like what you said in terms of like everybody trade in it. It's like the most current currency because that's what it is. Because in terms of like capitalism, anti-blackness. It doesn't exist without anti-blackness, and like it's also kind of like the way that like our society kind of like evolves. Like anti-blackness is how people like see like things as like evolving. It's like the more anti-black it is, like the more evolved, like, and the more like whatever, you know what I mean? But yeah, it's just what we go through every day, and I feel that like even when people are, I feel like even just like the action of like being conscious of anti-blackness when you are non-black is already just like as just a sign. It's just like something that shows that like that is like present. So like it's just how everything is.
Yeah, like anti-blackness is that hurdle that continues to be in front of us. It's weaved into our system that has allowed us to, it affects our businesses, it affects the way we identify with ourselves, it affects so many things that just ultimately make things very, very hard. And it affects, it's weaved into white supremacy and into a system that's made not to protect us or not to get us further ahead. Speaking from my own personal experiences with owning a gallery, having to be hyperly surveillanced and always watched, besides any other gallery, and consistently checked in on besides any other gallery. Or those are examples of things that are weaved into a system to make it harder for you to strive and to create a platform for other communities and your own community.
So John, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit.
Okay.
There was an incident that happened at Blank Canvas Gallery. It was a New Year's Eve party, I believe. Was it 2016 or was it 2017?
Well, yeah, it was 2016. Yeah, December 31st, 2016.
Can you talk about it? Are you
Yes.
in a position to talk about it?
I can't talk about it because I beat my case.
So, for those who don't know, do you want to tell the audience what happened?
So what happened was there was a liquor license infraction that had occurred, and with any other space, you would not be tackled by 5 police officers and tasered 3 times. In any other situation, any other space, there are so many different places and spaces that don't even purchase SOPs and don't even get fined, or let alone they only get fined. But with our space, we were always checked in to see if we were doing everything by the proper channels. With that being said, there'll be police officers that would constantly check in on us, plainclothes officers, so that made it harder. And officers that would just pull up to poetry events in like bulletproof vests and stuff, just being like, yeah, we just want to see what's going on. And even taunt me and be like, oh, be good, kid, be good, kid. And I can't really speak too much about it, but just the whole situation just really opened my eyes to systematic racism. Everything from the trauma that had occurred in the actual incident, and the fact that the only people that brought violence into Blank Canvas Gallery were the people that are hired to serve and protect us. The people that we looked to were the ones that showed that violence in my face. Everything from the incident to arresting me, to bringing me to jail. There were all these different forms of belittlement that had occurred. And with that being said, it really just as a community, focusing on the positives, it really banded us all together and allowed us to show solidarity, not only from, our people of color, but our allies as well. And they showed that through solidarity and helping us get over that hump, whether it was donating to our Indiegogo or being there and providing resources and helping us open a new space at 890 St. Clair Avenue West. So that in itself showed me a lot of the hurdles that we face, and it made it really, really visible and tangible to the oppression that we face when one is trying to start a business and do something with themselves. Yeah.
So you touched on systemic racism. Does anyone else want to touch on, structural violence and oppression and how it shows up in institutions, in our communities? Rania, I see you nodding your head.
Girl, I got things to say. Okay. Something that's really critical for me and sometimes missing from our conversations around anti-Black racism is the ways in which we systemically, as a nation and as institutionally, gaslight Black people. And gaslighting is a gender-based violence term that refers to when you are told your perception of your reality or your lived experience is not true repeatedly and you're denied that uptake, you begin to question that as well. So for me, the gaslighting of Black people happens by forcing you into thinking that, or trying to make you think that anti-blackness is a series of fragmented incidents, your racist uncle, the one dude who wouldn't sit next to you on the subway, these kinds of things. And even then, like, are they really racist? And are you sure they meant it that way? You know? And not a well-oiled and intentional system, that it's some kind of accident or happenstance that the world became the way that it is. And for me, the reality is that sometimes I love sci-fi and futurism. And so I read and I watch and take in a lot of sci-fi and futurism. And one thing that you'll notice immediately in that is that first, black people are absent. So, I mean, I have questions. This is supposed to be the not so distant future. What happens to us between now and then, fam? We survived a whole lot. I don't think we're going that easy. But the part of it that really alarms me is that dystopia that we imagine as a potential future in these genres. For black people, that's already here. Okay, it is. I don't need a conspiracy theory. I can empirically prove to you that our children from birth are not receiving the care that they need in hospitals as early as the neonatal intensive care unit, are found threatening by white and non-black people as young as 4 years old, are disproportionately targeted for disciplinary action in schools, are removed from our care and represent almost half of children in state care, are funneled from our schools into prisons, are suffering from twice the mental health issues as people who do not experience racism, are far more likely to be living in poverty and far more likely to die at the hands of police, legal institutions, and the healthcare systems, and are, despite black women being in North America the group with the highest educational attainment, being the least likely to get a job and the most likely to get impoverished. But then we're told, you know, if you try that much, if you work this hard, you know, you can break out of this, you can overcome these systemic issues. And on top of that, I know every black person I know is exceptional, okay? And the reason for that is resilience and being exceptional and remarkable are the ways that you survive. We don't have, being mediocre is a luxury we don't have. No, in reality, the being mediocre is for girls named Susan, it's not for me. Honestly, it's what it takes to merely survive. And for those of us who are black, people always talk to me about my work and they say, you know, you're so militant and intense. And I'm like, I need you to feel the same sense of urgency that I'm feeling, okay? That's important to me. When my partner goes out in the world and I am like, I don't hear from him for an hour, I'm like, all right, he got pulled over, something happened. That's a part of the reality of our lives. So for me, that it's everywhere. It's so insidious. And it doesn't need evidence, but the evidence is there. Whether you're looking for it or not, the statistics are there, the data is there, and then we spend our time arguing about shit like reverse racism. Like, it's exhausting. I'm gonna stop right here.
I just kind of like want to add like on to what you just said and like very well expressed in terms of like all the facts that you just cited. I feel that like it's also kind of like very important to like think about and always kind of like remember that like those like punishments and those things that happen to black people are always kind of like disproportionately higher when you are a person of darker skin. Like I think that that's something that like people need to understand, especially in a world where right now I feel that like there's like so much such like a big like use of black people in media because people just seeing that like, you know, it's like cool to like be cool with black people now. Like it's well, you know, you can capitalize off of black people more than like you could do that before in a way that is like, you know, you just like have to put a black person on the screen or like have to put a black person somewhere and then you got your cash. So yeah, and most of the time those tokens like always I'm thinking about like a comment that like someone it's this rapper this like black rapper his name is Leaf made a comment about kind of like talking about how like he's tired of like seeing the love that like, or not even the love, but just like the recognition that people are like giving to like black people through like a lens of like mixed and light-skinned people. And that is like something that is super real, and also like especially here in Toronto, that's something that happens a lot. And also I feel that like the erasure, especially like the erasure of dark-skinned black women is like very real in terms of like everything from like people that you see I don't know, I feel that like even just kind of like walking down the street and like seeing like a dark-skinned Black woman like holding like a partner's hand like fills me with joys, because it's not something that I see a lot, right? Or even just like in like media, like that's not like usually, most of the time like in like Black couples, like there's always that kind of like that unspoken rule of like, if we're talking about, you know, like the femme person is like lighter and the masculine person is like darker. Like that's like those things that like people do not touch on, but are very also insidious and like so very important to like the continuation and like the thriving of like anti-Blackness, because like it really is about, there's this article that I would suggest people to read that was on this website called Race Baiter, I think. It's BAITR and race.com, so racebaiter.com. I think it was, I don't remember what it was called, but it was pretty much like kind of like talking about how Blackness is obviously like your heritage and your culture and like all of things like that, but also is very much like rests a lot on how people see you. So it's very much about how you look, more so than how you feel and what your heritage is, in terms of like how you will like move through the world and how you will either like encounter punishment or like encounter like encouragements or whatever. Like Black people, but it's also important to see that difference and to understand that there is like higher like stakes and higher risks when you are a Black person of darker skin.
Ian, Huda, anything to add? It's cool if you don't have anything to add.
Yeah, so I think it's like very important to talk about the systemic anti-Blackness in terms of just very practical things. I think often when we have these conversations, maybe because it's immediate, we individualize the issue, and of course the issue affects us individually. Personally, in ourselves, in our families, in our relationships, in almost every aspect of our lives. But it also affects things like our life expectancy. So like Black life expectancy is less. Healthcare outcomes, like heart disease is killing Black people like crazy. If me and someone who identifies as white in the audience get the same level of hurt and have to go to the same emergency room, I'm about 50% likely to get 50% less or not at all pain medication, because of how doctors perceive us. How doctors perceive us is very similar to the way that police perceive us. Bigger, stronger, more violent, more able to take certain things. You can see that in the legacy of slavery when you see people talking about the way that Black people are viewed, generally as stronger, often as more violent, those sort of things. There's housing discrimination, mental health outcomes. So suicide rates in the Black LGBT community are incredibly high. I mean, you know, we could just go on. Like a lot of those statistics are actually like readily available in mainstream places. Like not even us talking about what's going on, but other people talking about what's going on in like the most cold, neutral, quote unquote, neutral way possible. That information is out there too. Sexual violence. And reporting of sexual violence, so higher sexual violence, but lower reporting of sexual violence with Black women. Yeah, so there's a ton of very practical results. Like for me to think, my father is an elderly man, for me to think about life expectancy, knowing that he's actually just now past the life expectancy of black men, that's like very present and tangible for me. And a lot of these things that we're speaking about, whether they're statistics, remember that somebody's mother, somebody's father, somebody's brother, sister, aunt, uncle, somebody's friend, partner, etc., is actually not just behind those statistics, but sitting inside the reality of expressing those statistics in their everyday life.
Can we talk about anti-blackness in a Canadian context? I mean, as we all know, anti-blackness is not a new concept. But sometimes in Canada, we like to look to our neighbors to the south and we say, it's not as bad here. Or I actually had a meeting with someone not that long ago, and it was like, oh, like anti-blackness. They talked about it in a way where it was like this new form of hate that was surfacing. Right? Can any of you speak to that?
I think it's worse that over here we act like it's not existent. It's like kind of like this elephant in the room, you know? And me just being brutalized by the police itself shows that, you know, we're no different than our neighbors down south, you know? And I think there really needs to be more conversations in Canada about anti-blackness in our system, because it is here, it does exist, and is very, very present. So, yeah.
Anybody else? Rania?
Yeah, I want to give someone else a chance if they have something to say.
What was the question?
Just anti-blackness in a Canadian context.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, Huda, do you want to go?
No, I was just gonna make a quick point. I mean, anti-blackness, it's transnational. It's beyond borders. I don't do the comparison of the U.S. and Canada. It's the same history. It's the same legacy. It's the same shit.
Thank you. Something that's constantly I confront in my work all the time, because about a quarter of my client portfolio is in New York, so I have some American context to an extent. But something that's really troubling to me is, first of all, Canada is a really great brand. From a marketing perspective, really, I mean, it's impressive. But we have these insidious Canadian manifestations of anti-blackness. The reality is that when the state is so steeped in anti-blackness and systemic oppression, it does not need to do the outwardly violent things. It doesn't. It's all streamlined. Okay? It's streamlined, it's upgraded, it's built into the system. That's something that I think is really important, and something that's really alarming to me is the meanwhile in Canada narrative. Like, I mean, I could tell you meanwhile in Canada, like, you're in Regent Park, don't you dare, like, come to me with this, oh, we're such a beautiful, peaceful, multicultural, and diverse place. I remember when I first came to Canada, getting out of Pearson Airport. I came here as a teenager, so, you know, I remember a chunk of my life not here. And there was this poster, and it was like, welcome to Canada, whatever, everybody's welcome, whether you're black, brown, or normal. And I remember looking at it, right? And my dad and me just looked at each other, and I was like, all right, it's like that, huh? Okay. But also, we're terrible at documenting things and collecting race-based data. That's something that's really necessary for me, because data saves my breath. Like, I just don't have to argue, I don't have to be in that horrible place of having to prove my lived experience to someone who is deeply invested in my oppression. It's an exhausting experience, and frankly, it's not my job.
I also just want to add one thing too. Like when we talk about anti-blackness in Canada versus the U.S. as well too, I think a lot. What happens often in this conversation is the erasure of the continuous work that has happened in this country to address anti-blackness, the liberation work that has been happening in this country right now with BLM, but has been happening for the past like 50, 60, 70, however many centuries and years. We erase that when we deny or ignore what's been happening here and continuously talk about there and then do a comparison between the two.
Yeah, and the idea of black folk as migrants to Canada or newcomers, that to me is really problematic. Black people have been here since for a very long time. And there's also this, because I mean, what that does is it centers whiteness as Canadian and everybody else has got to hyphenate, you know? That's something it's a huge problem, and on top of that, there's also an erasure of the legacy of slavery that here, right? Is because we did not have the plantation system like the United States did, that commercialization and the way that it was co-opted into capitalism looks different. However, Canada's economy does not survive without the subjugation of Black and Indigenous people. It just doesn't.
So the next thing I want to ask about is allyship. So how can different individuals who are not part of our immediate communities show up for us differently? Hoda?
With what was I? Do you want to go or should? Huh? Yeah. Go ahead.
I don't really have a response for that. I felt that it's just like I don't really know how to like tell people who are not Black, like how to see Black people who do not fit their idea of like Blackness as human beings, period. Because also I felt that like it's, for me personally, like I felt that like my liberation like only needs Black people. And I'm like, it's like everyone can like get to liberation and we can like all kind of like hang out together there when that happened. But I feel that like, for me personally, like I only need Black people to get to liberation and to like make that happen. So I kind of don't really have like an answer to like give to like see us as like human beings. I feel that like it should just be a given.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what allyship is. I don't believe it, haven't heard of it, never seen it, never met it. Don't know what that is.
You don't know her.
I don't know her. Yusra Kogali tweeted this the other day, and I think this is a very important question to ask that I've been asking myself, and I think that in context of this conversation, the white people in the audience and POC people should continuously ask is whose suffering is at the end of your access and your existence. Radical change or seeing freedom or liberation isn't really a possibility until we see that actively taking place in our own lives. I feel that a lot of folks are always so willing to do like this performative thing. I've done this myself in different contexts, but this performative thing where it's like, when we exclusively in the context of anti-blackness, when you see anti-blackness presented on your Facebook feed or in the news or maybe at a party or somewhere publicly, folks are willing to address it or stand up or say something about it, but aren't willing to do that work in their own private lives. They aren't willing to do that work with themselves, with their parents, with their family members, at the kitchen table, with their lovers, while doing pillow talk. Like, that work should be continuous. It's not just performative. It doesn't need to just be public. Do that shit on your own if you actually want to see some radical change in this world.
Yeah, 100%. That's all. 100%. I think Black people have been asked to do that labor since this began. Always talking to people about how to talk to Black people, how to be good to Black people, how to not treat Black people like animals, how to not exploit Black people, exploit their culture, exploit their everything. You know, the sorries, the constant sorries over and over and over and over again for like something that is blatantly obvious, that is historically available in basically every major library across the entire planet. Like, it's so basic. The reality is it's basic. Like, this is not some secret, right? And if you're shocked, like people were shocked when Donald Trump was elected the president of the United States.
Black people weren't.
Black people weren't shocked by that. Like, why would you be shocked? And then to me, the question then, of course, is, well, yeah, for yourself, not for me, but for yourself. Why am I shocked by that? And the answer is somewhere in either ignorance or just a total ignoring of a reality that you're not interested in?
Not believing black people.
Just not believing black people. Like how long, how many songs and speeches and books and lectures and everyday experiences, probably from friends of yours, do you have to ignore?
Yeah.
I think personally, yeah, it is. I agree with everybody on the panel. Like, it is very draining and exhausting to constantly be giving people and explaining people about this kind of racism, and also it just reminds us constantly about our trauma and our oppression. I think what the work allies can do is, in those rooms where we're not there, I personally, like, I'll never know what a room full of white people, what happens in there, in those kinds of spaces. I'll never know what is talked about, because every time, once I'm there, the dynamic possibly changes. And I think if you really are allies, is showing that solidarity and being accountable all the time and making those actions and really helping other white people understand, whether it's through conversation or calling someone out or sharing blogs or articles, anything that could help, so that we could start creating more of an anti-racist society and provide access to this kind of information.
I know it seems kind of hypocritical to be a partner in a series called How to Be an Ally and to say here and I say I don't believe in allies. No, I really don't. Allyship is a power dynamic, right? Who do you get to ally yourself with, and is it a matter of choice? Okay, are you an accomplice? Is this your, are you invested in this just as much as I am? Probably not, but you should be. The thing that I think a lot that Huda said really beautifully is that I don't want your allyship at a protest if you're letting casual anti-blackness happen at your dinner table, okay? I don't want that. And I'm not giving out cookies or trophies or gold stars for people doing the decent thing. So something that's hilarious, while I was organizing this panel, someone sent me an email being like, because whenever I organize an event, I either let black people in for free and everybody else has to pay, or, yeah, get over your feelings. Or there's a reserved set amount of tickets for black identifying people. So someone sent an email being like, well, I've been a really good ally for a long time, and for a long time, right? I was like, show me your receipts, Barb. Okay, but I've been an ally for a really long time, and
I've been an ally for a long time.
yeah, a really good ally. Okay, by whose metric? Questions.
That's a great song.
But and why is there reserved like tickets for black people? Don't you think we need this space more to learn? I was like, I'm gonna go ahead and ask you to make that a you problem. Like, but the thing that's really important to me here is that at the end of the day, we've survived without you. We've survived without you, okay? We be many and you be few. Just remember that, okay? We're getting our freedom, with or without you. The question is you coming or not? And, really, there's something that's problematic about a lot of liberation work that's about who gets to be white next, okay? I don't want that. I don't want your vision of liberation or your allyship if it doesn't include all black people, okay? I'm like, does it include, you know, the young black men selling drugs on my street corner? Does it include trans black women? Does it include disabled black folk? Because if they're not at the table, I don't want to be at your table either. This is the problem for me, because we ask people to prioritize their liberation, because that reinforces the system of who matters and who doesn't. Okay, we'll get our freedom first, we'll get to y'all later. And also, I want to really be careful that yes, it's about whiteness and white supremacy to an extent, but everybody, including non-black people of color, participate in this as a means of getting proximity to whiteness, as a means of surviving in a white system. Everybody trades in anti-blackness to support themselves. That's something that's important for me. Yes. Also, we're not coming up here saying anything that hasn't been said before. Okay, the labor is with you. We're doing a painful and costly labor, a labor that black people have done 1,000,000 times, that my father and my mother did, that my grandfather did as a journalist, that all of my ancestors did, whether they were, you know, writing history with the tips of their tongues, swords, or their pens. At the end of the day, we have done this labor before. Do not squander it. Don't come here and think, wow, you know, that was super enlightening. Let me go and like pay some white hip hop artists for their album. Let me go and, yo, trust me, the cultural appropriation thing really vexes me, yo. And talk to your kids, okay? I spend so much of my adult life undoing the bullshit you tell your children about everybody is equal. Okay? People, well, my parents taught me everybody's equal and I don't see color. It's exhausting. Everybody's equal. I'm glad you live in some other planet and not right here on planet Earth where people are not indeed equal. At the end of the day, talk to your children. This is the reality of our lives. And it's exhausting for me to be like, well, we just hired the best candidate. I'm like, did you? That's a question for you to consider. Or, well, we tried to invite the Black community to come to this event, they just didn't come. I'm like, yeah, because you're racist. Why would I come to your party? Like, at the end of the day, the narrative has to get more complicated and more nuanced. Yes, race is a social construct. No, it does not mean that it doesn't have consequences. And sometimes those consequences are fatal for all of us, including our children. So talk to your kids, because I'm tired of dealing with them.
One thing
So shifting.
I just wanted to say something real quick.
Of course.
I just wanted to because Huda gave us really great quote, and I kind of wanted to talk about that for a little bit. It's I can just say it again. It's whose suffering is at the end of your access and existence, and I'm kind of thinking about just access in general. And we're talking about anti-blackness, but I feel that you're talking about anti-blackness, but you can't talk about anti-blackness without talking about white supremacy. And people who are non-black, being conscious of not only anti-blackness that they're responsible for, but also the ways that white supremacy works in their favor, right? So I feel that sometimes I don't know, I've been in so many situations where either me or someone that I know, for example, I don't know, you interview for a job and you didn't get it, and it's always kind of the back of your mind, you always just kind of probably some white person got it. And 99% of the time, some white person probably got it if you didn't get the job. So I kind of wonder if there's people who are non-black and who for whom, you get hired for something, you get something, something great happens in your life. I wonder if there's people who actually kind of think there's probably a black person who applied for this thing or did this thing and didn't get it. You know what I mean? And it's that's something to I don't know if people think that way, or I don't think that people really realize that there is a lot of things that non-black people are awarded are really just because you're not black. It's just what it is.
So shifting the focus inward to our own communities, what is our collective responsibility with respect to anti-blackness and how it shows up in our own communities?
I feel like I'm just always talking, but all right.
You're giving me eyes.
I'm just looking to it's all good. Okay. I feel like we have a huge responsibility to confront internalized anti-blackness. We all learn anti-blackness because it's the way of the world, right? And whether that manifests itself in shadism or respectability politics or any of that nonsense. And also to accept that dismantling and unlearning that means those of us who have privileges, like me, in black communities because of our features, our skin tone, our hair, whatever, that we are building the kind of world where that no longer is a pass. So you have to do it with that kind of knowing. And on top of that, also how we police blackness using a white imagination of what black is. Okay, we kick people out of blackness. Oh, you don't sound black, or you don't look black in this particular way, whatever. And that to me is based on a very narrow imagination of what black is that's in the psyche of white people, and I have no interest in that. And also not to pretend like there are not other power dynamics inside our communities that determine how much you survive. Okay? There's often oh, we're all black conversations. And I'm like, yeah, but do you know what it's like to be a black woman? Do you know what it's like to be a queer black woman, a trans black woman, to be gender fluid, to be disabled, to be poor, could be sex working, dealing with mental health and addiction, all of these things. If your politics of blackness does not include those people, I think there's a great deal of internalized anti-blackness that we need to confront inside our communities, and that these things shape our relationships with other black people, and that even inside our organizing and our movements, there's a violence that follows these structures, that if we don't acknowledge, we can all get our freedom at once, fam. We really can. It's possible. Okay, I go to sleep and I dream it all the time. I know we can get there, and it doesn't have to be at the expense of each other. I love you here in the front. You're just like giving me life right now. Thank you.
I never thought that I would be in a space in my 60s hearing my youth talking about anti-blackness. I am dancing right now.
I think acknowledgement. Acknowledgement. So, you know, the ability to identify a problem. I've never thought that black people are one people. And I think that is reductionist. Because we're, as black people, or however we want to define ourselves, people of African descent, we come from and express so many different cultures, languages, ways of being, ways of seeing. I mean, there are more than 50 countries on the African continent alone. Not to mention all the other places in the world where we are, have gone, and have moved through. And the reduce, like when I hear people speak about Africa specifically, it feels like Africa is an island the size of Trinidad. My family's from Trinidad. Trinidad's a very small island. Africa is the second largest continent on the face of the planet.
Maps will never let you know that, though.
Yeah, smaller on maps. But I think even more importantly, because this is what the maps and the way that it's spoken about does, is the reduction of that physical place with all of its diversity to a small thing. Like you'll hear people, and this is a pet peeve of mine, you'll hear people list a bunch of cities and then Africa, or like America, Canada, Cuba, Africa, without skipping a beat, like, you know? So I'm not even saying that is an intentional thing that's happening with that individual, but it is definitely a reduction, and I think even if that is subconscious, to be able to correct, for that person to do the correcting, but also for people to be able to correct that person, to be like, you're reducing something of such value and diversity and to something incredibly small. And I think we do that in many different aspects, not just in like the geographic aspect, and I think we do that inside of ourselves as well.
Have we become complacent about racism in our own communities?
I think people on the side of privilege can afford to be complacent, right? Everybody on the other side of that, you can't. That's your survival. But I think definitely when you're privileged in some ways, it's easy to become complacent about things.
Kim, John?
Can you repeat the question?
Have we become complacent about racism that happens within our own communities? Anti-blackness within our own communities?
Have black people become complacent? Or I don't know how to answer that. What do you mean by complacent?
We're aware that racism exists within our communities, but are we at a point where, I mean, yes, a lot of us are fighting it a lot of the time, but have some of us gotten to a place where we're just like, you walk into a room and you experience structural racism and you're so used to it where you're just like, okay. Like it's just part of your normal everyday life.
I don't know if that's complacency or survival, right? Like, I don't know if that's, like, I think inside Black communities, yeah, there's some level of like, not necessarily complacency, but the same structural problems that play out in other communities, whereas, you know, we're all Black people, and then we disregard the shadeism and the colorism that happens inside our communities. We disregard the transphobia and all the other things going on in our communities. But I think in the outside, honestly, I don't blame any Black person for how they choose to survive. I really don't. If that's what's getting you through your day, sometimes you just like, you know what? I know that was racist, but I can't. So I don't know if it's complacency or survival.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it's already, I think Kim wants to answer this. It's already deadly to be dehumanized already, but then to like have to do the work of humanizing yourself on top of that, that's just not, that's double deadly. Like that's not cool. I don't think that responsibility, I wouldn't call that complacency. I call that, just like Rania was saying, that's survival, that's resistance in itself. Take care of yourself. I think that's the primary thing that I would ever suggest to Black people on this planet. Take care of yourself first, and then take care of the people around you if you can. White supremacy is not your, that's yeah, I don't know, yeah.
I feel that to kind of like respond to the question directly, in terms of if Black people are either complacent or whatever about anti-Blackness in their own communities. I feel that like it's, and I'm gonna take what you both said in terms of like survival and, you know, in terms of that being survival and kind of like resilience and defiance and all of those things. Yes, I also feel though that there is some kind of, there are people who will go through the risks of like you said, like do you like like I don't whatever, like do you, but also if you can like help the people in your community. I feel that there are always a certain kind of people in the Black community who take care of everyone else, and then other people who are supposed to kind of just like, you know, I guess like survive, right? But then other people's survival is so tied to everyone else, you know? I feel that like there's like a lot of I don't like to use that word, but privilege, I guess, in deciding whether or not you're going to stand up or like say something against like anti-Blackness when you're Black, especially coming from a perspective where knowing that like my liberation in my life and my existence is like very much tied, not because I want to, but because it's like that, is very much tied to like everyone else in my community being aware of anti-Blackness and colonialism and all of those things. And because I have to do the work, and because it's not a choice when it comes to certain people to decide to either stand up and like fight against that and potentially like use your life, you lose your mental health, lose like all those things, and then other people who kind of like have the privilege to kind of be able to kind of like roam around and go in the world and not worry about, not necessarily not worry, but at least like not put themselves in like danger to a point where they're like so visible in their like stand against like racism or anti-Blackness and being so vocal and like being potentially considered angry or violent or like all of those things. So I feel that like there's like a nuance in terms of like who gets to be silent and who doesn't get to be silent. I felt that personally at this point in this time, being silent about things like that, I don't know, like, I just don't understand why that would be someone's choice if they are aware of like things going on. But like, yeah, there's definitely certain like privileges that come with like deciding to just like turn a blind eye or not.
I think even in Black communities, we just have to be there for each other, you know? I feel like we would get so much closer to liberation if we're all pushing at the same time. And, you know, when you see those cats that are holding space, like when you see those Black businesses, support them, you know? Even if you can't come out every time, tell your friends about it. Even if someone is trying to use, like looking for something to put their business in or invest in, tell someone about it, you know what I mean? It goes such a long way, you know? And I think one of the things that I did struggle with near the end part, the latter part of Blank Canvas was I always thought that I could do everything at once. I always thought that I could do it all by myself, but the reality is you can't. And that's why communities are there. And you need to ask for help when the help is due, when you need help. And I think as in our own communities, if we just continue to support each other, support Black businesses, and try to keep the money in our pockets as long as possible, then we could see a lot of change happen.
Something that occurs to me as someone who's done this kind of work for 10 years is the cost is high, okay? It's precarious, and I'm not just talking about your mental health and your financial survival, because people are just not paying you, really. And on top of that, it's precarious from a life-threatening place, okay? I'm somebody who gets probably hundreds of pieces of hate mail a month. And I mean, it's everything from like, why, you think you're cuter than everybody? I'm like, but I am. All the way to, oh, you know, you should go back to where you came from, and just like really violent things that doing this work is not a luxury that everybody has, okay? You do the work knowing you may not survive it. And that's a really high price to ask people to do. I see it from the women in my community all the time, and it's almost always the women in my community. Let's not forget that. Who are taking care of babies, taking care of everybody and their mama, okay? Cooking, cleaning, studying, learning, fighting, battling, waking up, doing all over again. That's if you sleep. So I understand when some people don't do it at all, but let's take care of the people taking care of people.
What does that look like in our communities? Like, what are some tools or tips, or like, how can we support each other? So John talked about supporting Black businesses.
Money.
Money. Because even in the grant system, there's such a minute percentage that's given to Black creatives, collectives, or initiatives. And a lot of the time, our communities, we don't even know about these grants. Or we just think that, you know what, a white person is just gonna get it anyway. And sometimes we're just the quota or the token that is supposed to be filled in. And that is the problem. That's a huge problem. The idea that people are reading these papers who don't even know who we are, what we're doing, or how engaged we are in the community, are ultimately deciding where the money is going. And there's not enough money going into Black communities.
What about things like our emotional health or our psychological health?
Sorry, what was that?
Like our emotional well-being or psychological well-being? Like, what about things like that? So for example, like for me, growing up, the idea of even talking about mental health, like there's such a stigma that just doesn't happen
And
within
addiction.
our communities.
And addiction. Yeah. I was going to say, kind of jumping off of what particularly Kim and Rania are saying, Earlier this year, I had just started my PhD program last year, and a lot of the people that I'm reading are Black women, so like Audre Lorde, Toni Cade Bambara, Barbara Christian, Pat Parker, Lauren Hansberry, all these individuals I start to think about who, this is very US-centric, by the way, in many ways, but thinking about all these Black women who've contributed to Black lives, who also died early, and who died early from health complications, and how often, I don't know if someone's written a paper on this or has talked about this yet, but I would love to see it or read it, or maybe write it. How many folks who, particularly Black women, Black liberation movements, but also the people who are not named, the people who aren't known, the people in our communities who do this labor for the people around them and who die without being known, who die early, who get killed early because of this. Blackness, anti-blackness it's death. It's either an immediate death by the state, at the hands of police or at the hands of white supremacy, or it's a slow death. Either way, you're dying. That's what anti-blackness is. If I wanted to see a definition on Google, that's the definition I want to see. Yeah.
I would say, what was your question again, at the beginning?
How can we protect ourselves emotionally and psychologically?
Okay, so it's not about how other non-Black people like giving them tools or whatever, in terms of how
tools for us.
Gotcha. I guess so that also actually works. It's just because I feel that what you were saying goes directly with what I'm talking about in terms of anti-Blackness being death, and I feel that it's very important to make the decision that, especially if you want to consider yourself an ally or wanting to say that you want to support Black people, to decide and make that decision that no Black person at least in front of you is going to go through a violence or suffer without you acting directly, and that is something that can be done, I don't know, at your job, for example, if there's people who are being targeted, and it's clearly because of the fact that they're Black. There's so many instances where Black people or the Black person who is being harassed is the person who has to go up to HR and do all that work and whatever and all that thing. But I think that just a way to kind of just always just show up for people is you can take on that work. Or just one other example, and that can also just be in terms of when we talk about I feel that personally when we talk about Black people, for me cis Black people are the white people of the Black people, so that can also just be, you can just slap that on there. It's literally the same thing. It's interchangeable. Same thing if there's someone who's being harassed in front of you. Because whether they're Black or someone is being harassed because of their gender and all of those things or whatever, be violent towards the people who are committing the violence toward that person. Actually show violence. Be actually violent. Be actually violent towards the people who are enacting acts of violence onto people who you claim to be trying to elevate and support. Actually put yourself in danger in moments where you actually are not in the same amount of danger as the other person. You'll never be as endangered as a white person, as a Black person or a trans Black person. That will never happen. So in terms of helping each other in our communities or outside of our communities or whoever, I feel that showing violence is very key to me. It's very key to me. I feel that I kind of I'm talking about violence, so I feel that I kind of have to talk about just what I kind of mentioned about earlier in terms of privilege, because I said that I could really hate privilege. I think that word just like is like, just turns something that is actually real and like, for me personally, like not a good thing into like packages it into a word that is actually just like nice and like makes you think that like, what's a privilege? What's a privilege? Privilege is like something that you're supposed to want. It's a privilege. It's something that you're supposed to like want to get to. I don't think that being white is something that I want to get to, or like that most Black people like want to get to. I don't think that like being cis or like whatever is like something that I want to like get to, because those things like literally mean that like you have like a very limited like perception of reality and of the world, and there is nothing privileged about that. That's just actually very sad. So instead I feel that like it's not about privilege. It's just like thinking about, because I feel that like also like white supremacy, the thing that it does is just like it gives us language to talk about it, but like that makes it still feel okay. You know, it's privilege. It's just privilege. It's just a little privilege. It's nothing, and it's just. And that is like the work of like white supremacy. That is the work of like, you know, academia, that is like a very like white supremacist, the very like white supremacist institutions. Instead of like thinking about like instead of like thinking about ourselves as like privilege or like having privilege or like whatever, I think that it would be interesting to kind of like flip that and kind of like think about ourselves as inherently violent in X, Y, Z ways. Just like by being present, you're already violent. By being present in my space as a white person, by being present in my space as a cis person, you're already violent. So yeah.
Thank you, Kim.
So Kim, you started to touch on it a little bit, but in terms of violence, does anyone else want to give context of like what that means? Because I'm sure there are people probably watching this, when they hear the word violence, they think about it in the traditional sense of like a physical interaction, but violence can show up in different ways.
Yeah, but throw hands if you have to. Okay, no, trust me. Like, I'm not, if somebody in my community, somebody I love is in danger, you best believe I'm willing.
Yeah, I'm talking about throwing hands. I'm definitely talking about throwing hands on here.
Yeah, so
that's what I'm talking about.
Right, I think that's for me something that's, it is gaslighting and fucked up to tell people who are experiencing physical, emotional, mental, and systemic violence to be non-violent. Okay? I'm not about that. I'm not about that. I think that's something that's important. And also there's a kind of violence that we don't address, I think, when you talked about the mental and spiritual health piece for me, is the celebration of Black people's strength and resilience, particularly being strong and resilient as a Black woman. That is a trait earned through trial by fire, okay? That is what it is. I don't want to be resilient. I want to be soft and fucked up. That's what I want. Really, in reality, that's it. But you don't get that luxury, right? Like, that's the thing. Even people I work with, people who are like, I admire me, are like, oh, Rania, you're so resilient. I'm like, no, fuck that. Like, take that. I don't want to be resilient. Don't put that on me, right? Resilient means you can take it. And Anna, I'm done.
That's true.
Yeah, so I think there's something to be said about the cost, though, of defense of oneself. Yeah, you should totally have the right if someone puts their hands on you to put your hands on them in defense of yourself. But we know where we're at, though. And I think that has to be a very informed choice. Because if you're already viewed in a way that will mean something, that could mean something specific for you, and depending on who you support, that could mean something specifically for your family, your loved ones, as well. So I'm not saying no. I'm not saying no. But what I am saying is that to understand the consequences of that, because we're talking about violence for violence, you know? And so if you are treated with violence, you should have the ability to respond with violence in order to get out of that violence, 100%, and you are justified in doing so. But also in your body, knowing the way that the world looks at you, I don't even know really what to say in terms of that, because the whole thing is problematic. You're going to go to jail or worse. You're going to go to jail or worse. A lot of people have experienced something worse than jail consistently, and then their families experience that same thing too. So I don't have the answer to this. I'm not saying that I have the answer. I don't know, and yeah. I also want to go back to there was a question or a comment or a conversation about money as well. Money is important.
But not the answer.
But money is not the answer. It may be part of the answer. We live in a capitalist society. I don't think people should ignore the fact that we live in a capitalist society. You need money in order to survive, period. And hopefully you're doing more than simply surviving, and you're thriving. Actualizing yourself and actualizing the people around you, if that's possible. But money is not necessarily the answer. So, so I had an experience with money. I had an experience with starting something that in my mind was for black people. I won't go into all the details of it. I don't support this thing anymore. I haven't since 2010. And there was a lot of money involved. Now, I could go into a whole conversation about where this money came from and why, and the nonprofit sector and all that sort of stuff. But we're talking money in the millions. And it was actually the money that pulled the thing apart. And it was because of relationships of trust or lack of trust that fell apart. So you can throw money at a problem, and politicians, government, CEOs of companies have been throwing money at problems, often to absolve themselves, but sometimes maybe with some good intention, because there was some sort of a problem or a perceived problem. And oftentimes that money doesn't solve the problem. In fact, it creates more problems. So I think in relation to black people inside of their communities, I think we have to focus on relationships of trust, but trust is only for the trustworthy. Trust is not a singular, I just trust you because of the goodness of my heart. Like, trust is a reciprocal relationship between people that is constant, like exercise. You can't just do it once and all of a sudden you're strong. Like, you have to continue to cultivate trust, respect, et cetera, in order to build the type of relationships that if money or other kinds of resources come, you have the ability to build on that relationship. And in that case, yeah, money, because money made this space, keeps the lights on, keeps the heat flowing, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
I was going to go back to the other conversation. I don't think responding to violence should be called violence. I think it's just a reaction. And I think anti-blackness is, like you're pointing out, unfortunately, having to be cognitive of the consequences of reacting to violence, because in any of those types of scenarios, like if anti-blackness is presented to you in a violent way, and having to react to that's anti-blackness in itself, having to navigate that and having to, like, I don't know what the language would be for that, like trying to, I don't know. It's that conversation is complicated in itself, but I also want to point out that anti-blackness is also 6 black people on a stage right now talking about violence in a room where there's cameras and probably undercover somewhere. And my ass being worried about surveillance the entire time during this conversation. Yeah. So I'm gonna stop talking now.
I think the conversation about money is important because for me, it doesn't have to be money, it's survival, right? So much of us are preoccupied with surviving, and I know we're gonna get our freedom. I just want all of us to live long enough to see that, right? There's so many black people I know who are brilliant and passionate and resourceful and all the things that, it takes to survive the world as a black person, but are so preoccupied with survival that where are their contributions in a conversation like this one, right? That to me is like, there's so much absent here. There's so much brilliance that could be at this table, but it's not because that brilliance is working a double shift someplace. That brilliance is taking care of their kids and somebody else's kids. So I really just want us to survive long enough to be there, but also at the end of the day, I'm inherently anti-capitalist. So it's a harm reduction measure until we bun it all down and build something better, yeah?
So I'm gonna throw out one last question before we get into our Q&A. How do we imagine a future of freedom? What does freedom look like for us?
Freedom. I actually have tatted on my fingers, liberation. And I got this tattoo the same time I opened my gallery space because I truly feel that liberation and freedom is in community. Community is our equity. Community is how we get through whatever hurdles we face. It allows human agency, like my friend Salome taught me in anti-oppression panel. Human agency is so important. To be able to be in a space where you could truly be yourself, share your truth, and feel connected to everybody in the room without being threatened or in danger. Freedom to me is being able to start at the same mark as everybody else. That's freedom to me.
I don't really have to say much. I'll just say a little bit and then probably run to the bathroom and then come back. I think that freedom, I don't know, I feel that like nobody's really free until like black trans women and black trans femmes are free, so. Yep. And how do we get to that? Money. How do we get to that? Give us money, resources, space, and then get the fuck out.
That was literally a mic drop. Yeah, so I'm thinking of the two words here, future and freedom. I think the word future is a very complex thing in context of black people. The state determines time for racialized bodies, particularly black bodies, or any person that fits outside of the white colonial or like the hegemonic Euro-Canadian project. And I think that future for us is death. George Jackson wrote or said, the future is a time those without a future cannot risk, because the future is not coming, thus the present cannot wait. So I think that's it's a privilege to even think or consider or imagine what a future can look like. Freedom, I'm thinking of Alicia Garza, one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter. She said, when black people get free, everybody gets free. I think that should definitely be transitioned a little bit into exactly what Kim is saying. When black femmes and black trans folks are free, that's when everyone else, that's when the rest of us can see freedom.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know.
I think for me, liberation, I don't know about the future. You know, I'm just trying to get through like the next 2 hours. Really is, and then go home to whatever like shitstorm awaits in my inbox. It's a place where you get to come with all your parts. Okay, you don't have to leave any part of you behind. You don't have to break yourself into little pieces and decide, what can I bring in here? What won't get me killed?
Mm-hmm.
And then also for me as an artist, I think art does that for me, right? Like tell me the life you want and I'll write it for you any day. Like that's to me the most extraordinary power that my writing and art in general has done for me, is not only to be able to talk about the future, but to just manifest it in whatever way, to manifest liberation, to imagine what that looks like. But freedom really looks at freedom for those at the margins of the margins. If the people in the margins of the margins are included in our ideas of freedom and liberation, and not just included, because that's a weird power dynamic too, but are driving our imagination of liberation and freedom, and their talents, capacities, desires, and dreams are at the center of that, then I think that's what freedom is. And again, like I said before, I want liberation for all of us, and I'm not interested in who gets to be white people next. That's to me the most important thing about freedom. It's not who gets to be invited next, who's okay now. I don't want to just gradually expand the circle.
Thanks, everyone. Any last comments before we open it up for Q&A? Any burning thoughts, feelings?
Just let black people come up to the mic first if they want to come up to the mic, okay? Don't be disrespectful.
Okay, so we're going to get into the Q&A. We've got about 60 minutes. I'm going to ask that if you have a question, you can come down to the microphone, and then I'll signal you to go ahead and ask a question. To get as many questions in as possible, please try to keep your question under 2 minutes. If you go over, I'm going to respectfully ask you to wrap up. And as we proceed, just keep our community intentions of love, positivity, and mutual respect top of mind. Okay? Okay, so let's open it up to the audience. Does anyone have any questions? You can just come on down to the front.
Hey.
Wow, this is really, nerve-wracking.
How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, it's interesting because I speak in front of people often, but not in a mic. It's weird. And not with my back turned, I don't know. Kind of like this.
Yeah.
I'm Rochelle Miller, and I work here in Regent Park and Sorts, and in a few high schools in the West End, teaching yoga and mindfulness-based practices. And I'm most curious about not just justice, but restorative justice, and how we're really nurturing and giving those tools for evolution and thriving, and something that Kim said really stood out to me. She says, my revolution is not dependent on others, it's dependent on other Black people. And it really stuck out to me a lot, because I think what I witness in my work and my experience is traumatized people being re-traumatized by their people. Whereas we come to spaces really wanting to restore and really wanting to heal, and we get called out for maybe not being Black enough or strong enough, or just over-shamed for a variety of different things that can happen. So I guess my curiosity from you as activists in SORT, and my curiosity for activists in general, has been this question is, how do we call people in and not call them out? because the calling out, I feel, creates, more shame, more stigma, more hurt, more whatever it is that I'm just not even into, and has, in ways, had me step back from sometimes speaking because of not having the right way of being able to do so. So I guess I just really want for you guys all to speak to what are the ways that you're calling people in to this movement of liberation, within the Black community.
Thank you. Something that I think is important to remember in these kinds of conversations is the language is a currency, okay? And that kind of language is accessible to you based on a lot of different things, like your class, your access to the English language, your status, all sorts of different things that often when we throw people away when they don't have the right language and we fail to acknowledge what gave us access to that language, and also a lot of that language is white people deciding for us how to name our experiences. So it bothers me because I know when we can't throw people away because they fuck up, when I know exactly who gets thrown away and who doesn't, okay? We live in a community, in a world where nothing so much, being wrong is just the worst, and there's no room to come back from being wrong. I'm interested in how can we build the kinds of communities, I don't know that I have like a direct answer for you, but how can we build the kind of communities where, yeah, you fuck up and then we center the person you've hurt and we help that person heal and support them, and then we help you learn so you just don't take your harm elsewhere. But also where people who don't have, where poor Black people are invited into these conversations who don't have the luxury of this kind of language. That's something that's, I think, often missing. And also there's a criminalization of dissent inside our communities. We're not a monolith. People are going to disagree with each other, and that's okay. So I think accepting that and understanding that unity and solidarity doesn't always mean consensus and agreement.
Yes, I very much agree with what Rania is saying, and I feel like how we could do that to bring more people in is to respond, not react. That is what I feel like is super important, is to be able to listen and gradually talk about the situation and the problem to get everybody on the same page so it's different moving forward.
Anybody else?
I mean, I think I need a little bit more context with this conversation too, because I think this conversation transitions a bit. But I do want to say I definitely agree with what both John and Rania are saying. But I also do believe that we need to also, like when call-outs do happen, when it's in response to violence, I don't think that that should be something that we should deem wrong, or I think that's rightful, depending again on the context. But yeah, that's what I mean, like within the community, we can be violent towards each other, right? Our Blackness is not homogenous.
I think, I think there is something to be said about being able to acknowledge that hurt that sits inside the Black community. And there are hierarchies inside of the Black community, and power is exercised inside of the Black community. Often in relation to things like money or class or education or whatever. And I think, not just in the Black community, many communities can do harm to each other because just humans do harm to other humans. But I think that harm is doubled, tripled, quadrupled, et cetera, when you're dealing with harm externally and you're also dealing with harm internally. So I mean internally, like internally, inside of you as an individual, but also inside of all the various communities that sit inside of what we would call Blackness. And I think it's very hard to build anything if we can't work through that and be able to speak to each other and say, you know, you hurt me, without feeling like you're going to get hurt again in the process. And again, I don't have the answer for that either. You know, but a lot of the reason why I left the nonprofit sector was because of the violence inside our own community. It was us. And I know that there is a reason for that has to do with the violence that people have experienced in their own lives, in their family lives, in the systemic way, from the police, from the judicial system, from the education system, from all the exploitation that people endure. And I understand it, and I understand it more now than I did then. That took a while. But it didn't mean that it didn't hurt, though. Even if I could understand it, where that came from. And I'm sure in the process I did some of the same things, consciously, unconsciously. And so I think a lot of this is actually about us being able to see ourselves, to be able to burn through some of that unconscious stuff that we have inside of our heads, in whatever way that we do that. Spend time with ourselves, tell stories in the mirror, you know, write songs, write poetry, paint pictures, write essays, I don't know. Whatever, you know, go have a conversation with someone who is a professional, or speak to someone who is a member of your family that you trust, or a friend, and work through some of our own stuff, because there's enough coming at us from everywhere else. And then on top of that, inside of us, we're also very damaging to ourselves. And we lose a lot of people because of it, you know? I wanted to say this earlier. My mother's name is Claire Preto. She's the first black filmmaker in the country. She did a lot of work in the black community to bring black people together, and mentored a lot of people that we now know who are in the world doing media, film, television, radio, et cetera, theater, et cetera. And she, you know, she just went through a lot of shit, quietly. She's an Aries, so she was fighting in the world, you know, but quietly she went through a lot of stuff. And she got treated very badly by other people who were actually inside of our community. And I'm sure there's people on this panel, people in this room, and people all over this city who've experienced the same thing. Yeah, so I just think like it's very important for us to be able to acknowledge when somebody has hurt us, and also when we have been hurt, and figure out a way to have a dialogue. Yeah, figure out a way to have a dialogue. And hopefully beyond, I'm sorry for talking so much, but hopefully beyond a dialogue. Like, to me, it's beyond stories, beyond conversations, but like how those stories and conversations transform themselves into actual, practical actions.
Any other questions from the audience?
Good evening, and I just want to say thank you for your courage, your honesty, your transparency. I'm a black woman, as you can see. I was born here, and I experienced racism in the public school system from grade 1 right up. I used to get beaten up every day after school. Kids used to wait and block me in the schoolyard and beat me up, take my lunch money, all kinds of things. With that kind of history, I ended up growing up, being a woman, had plans, a dream that I would be a wife, a mother, and not be a statistic of being a single black mother, because there was a lot of negativity. But life happens in those things. That what I didn't want to happen became me. So what I realized, as you were talking about healing and facing our wounds, and relationship and family, that's one thing I didn't hear. Family's huge. And when family has been traumatized and re-traumatized, and we're all trying to make it, you tend to push aside your pain and not deal with it, and not realize you're actually hurting your own family by not dealing with our pain. So it's beautiful to be able to hear conversation, honest conversation about our experiences. The question that I have is, how would you, any one of you, encourage our Black community with our families that have been torn apart by the system, whether it's through CAS, whether it's through the legal system, whether it's through even the healthcare system, the educational system. It has divided and conquered our families. And I've raised 2 young people. I've had to fight with them still within the school system. I put them through French immersion. I get a phone call saying, your son can't handle it. He needs too much attention. But he was brilliant. I fought. Then you're told as a Black woman, you're too aggressive, you're too domineering, you're intimidating, so you back off. Our Black men are beaten down. They're too intimidating. Same thing, they're violent. So how do we, because we've all been desensitized to some degree, brainwashed to some degree, we've been colonialized to some degree, we've taken on a persona in the way we dress, the way we speak, the way we conduct ourselves. I had a conversation with a white coworker, and I said, the truth of the matter is that when I walk into a room of white people, I scan the room and I have to determine, how Black can I be? Or how white do I have to become to be accepted? And that's the reality of our people. So in this dialogue, how do we, as parents, siblings, cousins, brothers, sisters, strengthen our family unit so we can really be authentic in our wounds to give us a space to heal? And you actually believe this system is going to allow us to happen when it's all about the money and about power and about position, right? Which we know that hasn't really changed much. It's just taken on a different form.
Thank you. I want to say first, I'm sorry for your experiences and thank you for sharing that. I think we get so used to hearing these kinds of things from other Black people that we don't take a moment to acknowledge what we just heard, right? I don't know, some days I feel like it took a really long time to get this emotionally closeted. Do I want to go and undo that? Like, honestly, some days survival looks like that, and some days it looks like just like letting ourselves be soft, you know? There's a saying in my community that she who's soft is not easy to shatter, and I think that softness is something we should hold on to. And taking care of each other and our families, but I see a lot of, inside our communities, there's a lot of blame of Black women for the state of our families. I see that constantly, and it's really exhausting. I would like for us to start pointing our fingers in the right places, okay? And at the right people. And largely, I think we need to love our babies to freedom. And I mean, I personally don't believe in like hitting children, and particularly I don't believe in being violent towards Black children. That's something that's critical for me in my understanding of liberation. Black children go out in the world and the entire world is violent to them. When you come home, you have to know that is the one place. That is the one place where you never have to fear that. It doesn't even have to happen to you, like the thought of the fear of it or the threat of it can't even enter your mind. That to me is a political stance and I think is really necessary. That we don't beat down either physically, emotionally, intellectually Black children inside our homes. And start believing in interdependence, okay? I mean, I live in the inner city. I know how the hood does that really well, okay? People believe in mutually assured survival when they don't have a lot to survive on. So I think that's something we need to adopt and like let go of this idea of independence, which is, to me, it's Eurocentric bullshit. People don't survive by themselves. So taking care of each other in those ways, I don't know that I have the perfect answer of restoring and fixing and healing our families, but also like being allowed the time to be broken down and fucked up and take the time to heal, and not being valued only for your capacity to produce or to do along really capitalist and problematic lines.
Anybody else want to attempt answering the question? It's perfectly okay if you guys don't want to.
It's such a big, such a big question. Like that's just to me, the relationship or the family is the core of everything that we're talking about. That yeah, there really is no individual. And yeah, that is such a big question, you know? I know like that it's one of my privileges. I didn't have a lot of extended family, but I did have my mother and my father, you know? I remember standing in the halls of Oakwood Collegiate when I was like 15, 16 years old, hanging out with my friends and seeing at the other side of the hallway, my mom just walk by, just out of nowhere, just walk by. She would come into the school every year, not even like parent teachers or any of that, just like come through. Like once a year, just to come through, you know? This is a busy single mother. And so I know I wouldn't have survived high school without my mother. I know I wouldn't have survived high school without my father. They were in my corner. A lot of my friends didn't necessarily have their father present, or had moms who would walk into the school in that way. And there's a variety of different reasons why that could happen with my mom and didn't necessarily happen in other circumstances. And I think the family unit with the core of that being the relationships between those people in that family is so important. And a lot of our families are broken. And then there's a bunch of other individual issues that are always floating around in every family and in every individual that get multiplied by the pressure that people are under. So I think your question and your experience is extremely important, but I think it's such a complicated thing to respond to.
Okay, do we have another question? Mm-hmm.
Okay, my name is Shukri, and I would like to thank you all for the wisdom you imparted today. So thank you, kudos. For this question, sorry, Rania, I love you. I would like anybody but Rania to answer. Only because I have the privilege of talking and picking Rania's brain any time of the day. And hey, if you feel the need to want to answer,
No, I'm
free.
good. I'll be quiet.
Okay. So I guess my question, it surrounds a lot with, I'm pretty sure you guys are all students of history. And when we read a lot of the textbooks that has to do with the mobilization or the organization of Black bodies, and the leaders that, I guess, spirited a lot of those causes, such as Huey Newton, Malcolm X, Assata Shakur, Martin Luther King, you know, what do these people have in common? They're either dead or exiled. And that's a reality. And, you know, for I guess, young activists, a lot of the times, you know, we get that spunk, that blood that pumps in our soul from these books. And then there's that reality of what happened to such, like, huge figures in history. So I guess what I'm asking the crowd today is, I understand the significance and the need to mobilize and organize, and why it's important that we do it as a unit. However, like when it comes to the call of action, like what do you do when that call is costly, and how do you reconcile that with those fears, and then also wanting a better tomorrow for yourself and everyone else? So I hope that made sense. Did it? Or?
Can you repeat it one more time?
Okay. So what I'm asking is, like, the call for action is important, but then there's also that fear, because it asks you a lot. You have to give up so much, whether it's being imprisoned whether it's sometimes lethal, it ends in death. Like, you lose so much to do the right thing. So how do you reconcile that with the hopes of still wanting a better future, whether it's for yourself, your children, and your community, right? Sometimes, like, is the cost worth the end, which is the result? Or is it like, I guess, similar to that question she asked, sometimes do we have to be complacent in order to save ourselves? So which battle, I guess, in the spectrum of things, is the more important to battle to fight, right? Do we work for what's good for us as a collective or what's good for us individually? Yeah. I hope that made sense. Did it? Okay. Thank you.
I think stand for something or you die for anything. And we are all activists in this room. Activist means action. Us taking this step to even be in this room to have this conversation is an action towards a better future. I don't want to be the dude that I walk in the street sometimes with my girlfriend and I hear people be like, oh, that's that gallery guy that got tasered. I don't want to be that dude. But you know what? Every day I think to myself, what makes me different? Why would I want any other person to be in that position? And because I'm in that position, I have a platform to speak on the injustice. Because I'm in that position, we showed resilience as a community. We showed love. We fought with our minds, with our art. And art to me is the greatest form of decolonization. I always remember that every single day. So what I say keep going, keep fighting the battle, and keep pushing towards a better future. That's what I say.
So I don't know. I feel that personally, that's kind of like a question that, like everyone, if you decide to like do this work that you, like you just said, like, you know, it's like work that can be very dangerous, like, because like the cost of like putting yourself in that visibility spot, in that spot where like people like recognize you, like you said, like people might like recognize you in the street for like doing this action, or like, and it might be people that might be like appreciative or like praising you or whatever, but like it might also like be like other people who are trying to like, you know, harm you. I feel that that's a personal question that like each person has to ask themselves, and not only like a personal question, but also I think that at a certain point, like it becomes a quest to also kind of like look for people who also do similar work, or at least like can like offer you support in the ways that like they might maybe like be more experienced, or even not necessarily more experienced, but just like power in number type of thing, in terms of like being able to like see yourself and like your actions and like what you do and what you believe in being reflected in like other people. I know that personally, like starting out, like speaking out about like things like anti-blackness and trans antagonism and like all those things, like kind of like started off like kind of like very like shyly, but then finding out that there's, even like till this day, like I'll be like feeling some type of way about like saying something that I feel like is fundamentally true to my experience and like to the experiences of a lot of people, but feel that like maybe I will get like repercussions for saying that, because people might not be ready to hear this truth, or people might not just like see it this way. And being able for me to like see someone else who kind of like has like similar experiences as I do, being like loud and vocal and just generally just like telling it like it is, like inspires me to also do it that way. So I feel that, yeah, it becomes a quest. And also like, I feel like what you just referred to kind of like, it kind of like links a little bit to kind of like what I was talking about earlier in terms of knowing and knowing that that work, that you have to do that work, knowing that that work, like, is here for you, and nobody else will pick up that load outside of you. So that's kind of like also why there's all these things about, you know, when we talk about like how it's dangerous. I feel like sometimes, like when we're talking about like how it's dangerous, we don't necessarily talk about how it can be dangerous we're thinking about like how it can be dangerous like out in the world, like at work, or like, you know, with like when you're just like out in the street. But it can also be dangerous in our own families, right? In our own communities, like our own family members can reject us for like having like ideas and thoughts that can be, that they might think like might be like too radical or something. So I feel that like it's really kind of like a decision that you have to make with yourself to like decide that you want to take on that work, and that you also want to take other people with you on that journey. Personally, what I believe in is that I don't need all Black people to actually get to freedom. It would be great if that happens, and that's great if that happens, but also I cannot like break my neck like trying to like save everyone, right? Like I cannot like kill myself trying to save everyone. So that's how I cope personally. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one thing for me lately in life is like prioritizing my own healing and my own survival, like my own well-being, because you can't be in a position to take care of others in whatever context, whether it's on a micro level not micro, but like with context of family, your peers around you, or even on the level of activism and doing things for community or for the purpose of Black liberation. You can't help. That's labor that is almost an impossibility if you are not well yourself. And I think that's my primary concern right now in this life. Like for me to be well and hopefully be well enough to help others around me be well. But like Kim said, I think that's a very personal question and inquiry that we all have to contemplate in terms of our capacity.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I essentially did the same thing. I think that the individual is the community and the community is the individual. I don't think that is a binary. I think they are the same thing, and there's a ratio or a spectrum of those things depending on the individual and what they need at that, whatever moment that is. If what you need is to totally focus on yourself for whatever amount of time, that is important. If what you want to do is be a focal point of a movement, in terms of organizing, that sort of thing, that's important. I also think we look at the way that movements are organized, certainly in the global north, in a very individualistic way. And I think that's why so many movements could actually be destroyed, because there was a singular person you could usually point to that was the figurehead. There was that person was never doing all of the work, obviously, but there was definitely a figurehead in the way that a president or a prime minister is a figurehead, and there's a much larger organization happening there. And I think that is a mistake. I think we need to find a way to work without figureheads, but to actually work together without that more specific and individual view. Yeah.
This mic is not for me. I have to pull it off. There we go. Hi, my name is Zimbal, and my question is, how important is rootedness in your history, in your culture, in where you come from, to finding liberation? This is a question I have as a queer Caribbean youth who hasn't felt rooted in either his Guyanese or his Jamaican background, not to set out a myth of homophobia within those communities. But in my particular experience, especially with that and rootedness in the church, and where the queer male exists in the church, in those types of situations, there hasn't been rootedness in that sense, but there has been rootedness in the Toronto community, in my locale. But as an artist, as you guys are artists, there is a hurdle, a hump, where if you don't feel like you are where you come from, it's very different. It's a very different approach of trying to, okay, you're really nodding, yeah, of trying to get there. So how important is rootedness?
Thank you. Just to clarify, you're talking about being rootedness? Rootedness, yes, thank you. Okay, so, you know what? That being excluded from that last question was a blessing because I had to pee forever, so. I'm not even mad about it, Shukri, I forgive you. It's cool. I think something actually, Lali, now that you said that, I'm gonna put you on the spot a little bit, that Lali's work in the Queering Black History Month event and conversations like that, I think queering and like feminizing our histories is necessary in order to feel connected to them, right? Even in our communities, I think about what are the practices of like knowledge production, knowledge transmission, documentation of history, who's doing that work? Am I in it? That's something that's important to me. And I don't think being rooted in it always looks like a direct connection. I think we forget that just as trauma is in our bones and in our DNA, so is our resilience, our knowing, our magic, our wisdom. So I think I feel rooted and connected, not necessarily always through connections with my family, who I love them, you know, I have a lot of love for them, but they don't always see eye to eye with me about a lot of things. And I'm a queer Black Muslim woman, you know, we're not gonna line up on a lot of different things. So that's something that's finding that and connecting to it in my own way and on my own terms. That's important to me, but it doesn't necessarily look like following the structures, the passageways, and the systems that were set out for me by someone who's not interested in my survival, let alone thriving. I always think about, whenever I'm speaking, I think about all the women who had to quiet themselves to survive just for me to be able to exist and be here today. And I think I owe it to all of them to free all of us. So I feel rooted even if my people don't claim me in that way. Okay, I feel just as entitled to, it's my birthright to claim my community, my history, my ancestry. And I'll be damned if I let somebody who's on the privilege, as much as I hate that word also, but on the powerful side of those dynamics, determine how I do that or if I have a right to it.
Hello, everyone. I just wanted to say thank you for this beautiful panel. I was sitting in the audience and I found everything that you guys were saying very validating to hear it vocalized. And so I was sitting in the audience and I was wondering, how do I formulate this question that I have? So it's not going to be a question. It's kind of asking what your opinion is on this. It's a bit of a change of pace. But historically, we as Black people, we've lost connection to our ancestral technologies, right? For many of reasons. And for many of reasons, we found white people, teaching these ancestral technologies. Whether it's, because of class, money, the privilege that they have of being seen through their nuances, right? And so I just wanted to know if you guys can talk or speak on what the responsibility is of the teacher and what the responsibility is of the student as, someone that is reconnecting to their ancestral technologies, but seeing it being taught by someone that does not look like them.
Stay in their lane, that's all I have to say about that. Stay firmly, ask yourself every day, am I moisturized, hydrated, am I firmly in my fucking lane? It'll keep you happy.
I'm done.
I can't, that's it, I'm done, I'm out.
I was actually, sorry.
Okay, I'll give you a background. The reason why I asked this is because, for example, in Toronto, Black people don't necessarily have the luxury of, let's say, going to Trinidad to learn stick fighting, or going to study with a Shango Baptist priest, or going to Brazil to go to study with a capoeira mestre, or learning African drumming, going to West Africa or whatever. And so a lot of the times, in this quote-unquote reappropriation of our technologies in order to pass it on, now that we have the ability to do so, or we have the space to do so, what is the responsibility of that teacher, and what's the responsibility of the student to then be studious enough to like carry on that tradition, if that makes sense?
I mean, each one teach one, it always sits with me, because that's how I learned everything in my life, you know, everything, all the women, the people in my community. So just a few weeks ago, I made Sudanese sambusa, which is samosas, but that's what we call them. So Sudanese sambusa, and it's very specific to Sudan. East African sambusa in general is just like different from South Asian sambusa.
It's better.
Agreed. And you know, two of my young Sudanese women in my community, they're like, well, I've never made it. And so we had this big gathering at my house, and everybody showed us, and people showed us different ways that they folded it from their families and things like that. And I think about how much of that is in our bodies, and if you have the knowledge, it's your duty to pass it on to someone. You cannot let it die. You just can't. Whether that is making sambusa, whether it's, burning a bundle, protecting yourself, sweeping away evil with a broom. Whatever your magic, your medicine, your food, your culture, your art, whatever it is, if you know it, you have a responsibility to, if you let it die with you, that's a betrayal of your ancestors to me. I can't accept that. And you don't need it to go through formalized spaces and pass through the lens of whiteness for it to be valid in that way.
Are you asking like what is the responsibility of the teacher if the teacher is not a black person? Okay. Yeah, exactly, right? Stay in your lane and
Pick another major.
Pick another major.
Pick another major. Go back to school, pick another major.
Yeah, no, it's exactly that. It's like it's kind of like, I don't know, like what I was like thinking about earlier in terms of like if you're not black and like you have access to like things, like you probably have access to those things just because you're not black primarily. And like very perfect example with like, you know, like white people going on like there's like trips on like in like other countries and whatever that like, I don't, like a black person can go back to my country. I can't do that. You know what I mean? So like there's like all those things that are like part of, you know, just regular casual like white supremacy. As far as like responsibility for the student, I feel that like if you are like a non-black person trying to like, I mean, the ideal would be to just not try to like learn things that like have to do with like typical like traditional like black, whether traditional or not, like just if it's black and like people just like to pretend that they don't know that things are black, but you know what's black and you know what's not. Just leave it be. But I don't know, there's like other areas where like it's like something that like, I was talking with a coworker of mine, and she was kind of like talking about ceramics, for example, because you were talking about ancestral technologies, and she was talking about ceramics and how like ceramics is kind of like has very weirdly became this like Pinterest like white woman type of like art type of thing, and it's like, but this is literally how like people like, you know, build their houses, like build their like utensils, like did all of that stuff like before like colonization and all of those things, and even after. So like things like that, that's just like a small example of just like a lot of like ancestral like technologies, and like whether they be like art formed or just like survival based or just like just everyday life type of things. Just there's a lot of things that has been like stolen from black people. So now in terms of like responsibilities for people who are teaching that and who are not black, I feel that like the responsibility should start at like what exactly like do I get from like teaching this, and what most importantly like what am I taking like if I'm teaching this. So yeah.
I did my undergrad in African Studies at University of Toronto, which meant all my courses were taught by white people. I was actually actively against academia, and I think that like switching my major to African Studies pushed me to want to get into academia, because I was like, hell fucking no, I'm not letting Caucasians teach my fucking discipline. So I guess I'm answering this like strictly from like an education standpoint, but I think that that's why there's such an urge to see Black folks teaching, especially in a Black diasporic city like Toronto, where institutions have Black, like there's a move right now towards seeing Black studies programs, but we have existing African studies programs and Caribbean studies programs with no Black academics or very little Black academics. And that you see that all the way down to like even the graduate level, the people who are being accepted into these programs to do research, who end up becoming TAs and who end up being the people that we sit in classrooms with, teaching us things like Swahili classes and stuff like that. I heard a really deep sigh. that literally is me the last 10 years, just like, oh. Yeah, I don't know how to answer that.
I feel like quoting yourself from an earlier panel you were on, where you said, "Are you black though?" I think to me that was like the most iconic moment of my life, by the way. But that's just like the metric for everything. Ask yourself, "Are you Black though?" If not, just and also remember that access. Black people don't even have that access. Okay, we cannot go buy a plane ticket just to go on a journey of finding ourselves in somebody else's fucking country. Okay. Really and truly, that's something and also it's appropriation because the power dynamic is always ever present, okay? There is no space in which that is cultural exchange or appreciation. It just doesn't exist.
Thank you, everyone.
You're welcome.
Shout to Lally.
Do you have a question? Yeah, come on up.
Just adjust the mic here. Okay, I usually don't like speaking in front of crowds. But I feel like the urgency of what's being discussed has really made me want to speak. So I'm a master's student in education at York University. And I don't have a question, but I'm tired about a lot of things that I'd like to share that I kind of just jotted down while you guys were talking. That I feel like will contribute to the topic of allyship within anti-blackness. First of all, I feel like for me, the higher you go up in education as a Black female, on top of that being Muslim, there's less representations of yourself. So for me, I've dealt with a lot so far, especially in terms of seeing peers and colleagues who think that they are advocates for social justice and change, but also kind of feel it's necessary to speak on behalf of people's experiences. And to equate their experiences of marginalization, like sexism, to anti-blackness. And I feel like that's not something that you can do. I'm also tired of performativity, like you guys discussed, the script of things to say, the performance of being an ally, which doesn't really seem that sincere when you see people that are so quick to answer questions on the topic of social justice regarding racism, but at the same time turn to minorities to speak on how bad racism is. Like, I don't need to tell you how bad racism is. I'm a minority. Also, I'm tired of people turning to Black folks to always explain and account for the experiences of marginalization when the people in graduate studies or in higher academia, sorry, let me just backtrack because I wrote a lot here. Yeah, so I'm tired of having to explain that as a Black person, you can face multiple oppressions through intersecting identities. I'm tired of the narrative of resiliency being used to stifle the experiences of Black people, especially since resilience is used to say that you just need to get over it and that you can overcome and you need to forgive and you need to heal in order to truly move forward. So I guess my question to you guys, especially within the context of education, is what does the future look like for Black children? What does it look like for people who try to navigate spaces within academia that don't necessarily feel like they belong there because of the lack of representation and the idea of taking up space?
Oh, I feel like you're the one who's in like school. I left. I couldn't deal with that.
I'm trying to leave. I think that the education system at whatever level in Canada or here, I don't know what it could look like. I know what it should look like. It should look like a space that's safe for Black children to come to and learn from, meaning no police officers in schools. Stop criminalizing us by suspending us all the goddamn time, streaming us into actively working us away from academia, really. I should, side note, say I don't think that academia is the end-all be-all of success. I just happen to be in academia. But yeah, stop streaming us out of the education system, stop criminalizing us, stop suspending us, start teaching our histories or a particular form of history. It should also look like more Black educators, but I actually think that we sometimes forget to talk about how important it is to see Black administrators in the education system, because they're the ones who actually really dictate our lives or experiences in the education system. I feel like I should be rambling on about this question, but it's also been like 3 hours. My body's feeling all sorts of things right now.
Mm.
And this lighting is really anti-Black.
Yeah, it's
Kim is literally hiding her face from it. Lolly's dipping.
Lolly's been texting me about how hungry he is, so.
I think he's been texting me for the past hour.
So I think usually when we talk about education, I think we're usually actually thinking about school. And I think we need to separate school from education. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, we're educating ourselves all the time in a variety of different ways. We do it amongst our friends, our family, you know. I'm a big advocate of travel, so I mean, but it's true, it is a privilege. But I think when we're speaking about education, we're often speaking about school, and I think we need to separate that, because there's a lot of education happening all the time, and there's a fragment of that is actually the schools that we go to. I do think school is a power dynamic in relation to work and economy, and that's only happening more and more in academia now, and all the other levels of school are essentially pushing us towards certain places in academia that have particular outcomes for the system that we live in, economic outcomes for the system that we live in. So things get valued and things get undervalued. But I also think we need to think about that education system as our education system. Like, it's ours, it's not something that's external to us. We are people that live here, and it is meant to be, it's meant to be something that everybody gets to experience, or everybody should experience. And they, meaning us, should see ourselves in that education. And we don't. And that's a failure of the system, not a failure of us. And the system is actually responsible for that. That the system, that is our education system, should be providing education for us in all the various ways that we are us. So Black people, non-Black people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We live in one of the most diverse cities on the face of the planet, but we get taught in one way and taught a curriculum that is lion's share Eurocentric, white supremacist. Yeah, and I think we just need to see it as ours and demand that we are inside of it in a certain way.
Yeah, we have time for one more question.
My name is Felicitine McLeod, and I'm a mental health worker. I work with individuals and families with mental illness and also developmental. And great just to the all of you are so outspoken and candid, because as a child who went through the school system in the 70s, I would never believe that I would actually experience a group of young people who would see the same thing like what we saw in the 70s. I went to Oakwood Collegiate. I could only stay there for 1 year, and then I had to leave because I couldn't find myself there. But I learned something profound at Oakwood Collegiate from a white teacher, and that was what, as a black woman, I would be pregnant and have children, lived on welfare, and no husband. And I said to Mr. Lucas, I said, watch me. And with that, I made sure I took my education. I finished college, and I went off to university, went back to college and went back to university, raised 4 children in the system. All my children graduated with honors, right? And I made sure I made sure that they were policed heavily by me, not by the system. So that's something that we need to know, that as parents, we need to first be the post for our children and the foundation as well. And I find that now coming forward, working with children, especially youth with mental health challenges, I find a lot of them don't know how to disclose. And it's not that they're afraid to speak, it's just that they don't trust the system. And many of them do not even trust us, the black people, because they're being so suppressed, right? They're being so suppressed that they don't know where to open up and how to open up and who to open up to. I always say to them, there's 3 things that you don't do, no, 2 things that you don't do, but 1 you should. I said, if somebody's gonna speak at you, walk. If somebody's gonna speak to you, walk. If somebody's gonna speak with you, sit and listen. Because we're here, we want to speak with them. We want to have a dialogue with them, not for them to be talking down to, because that will further suppress them not to be able to open up and speak, right? So that is what I'm trying to do. I've written several articles as well when it comes to mental health and dealing with mental health. So for me, when I heard the discussion about freedom, it took me back to Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who spoke about men are born free, but everywhere is in chain. And I feel that's way it's about everybody. Not only men or women or black or white, I feel it's towards everybody. We're some way, somehow in chain. And also too, just for it to take away, for you to answer for me, do you believe W. Du Bois saying that we still wear the veil? Do you believe that we are still wearing the veil as black people? Thank you.
Veils?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you say Rousseau?
No.
Oh, Du Bois, wow.
Du Bois talk about the veil that black men wear. My background is in history, psychology, and sociology.
I'm gonna have to sit with that one, sister.
Yes. Yeah, I know. I 100% believe that we're still wearing the veil because it's dangerous not to. And certain people choose to go outside of that. And, you know, and sometimes we see the consequences of that. You know, Dubois talked about double consciousness. I still feel like that's very much present, like that we have to know ourselves, but also the dominant culture, and we're always navigating that at the same time, double consciousness. Yeah, yes, I 100%. I hope, though, that we won't always have to do that.
Yeah, I very much agree with Ian. I do feel like we still wear a veil, and I hope in the future that we won't have to. And I think that's through continuing to find other ways that we could open up and share our stories, not only through conversation, but through our art and through community and providing more safer spaces.
Thank you. Okay, last question.
I'll be quick. So my question is, in February 2016, the Ontario government created the Anti-Racism Directorate. And I was just wondering what your feelings are or belief in terms of it addressing anti-Black racism, particularly when there's a huge issue of anti-Black racism within the Ontario Public Service, where I work. So if you could just answer that, thank you.
You're brave for that first.
I was gonna say, you know there's cameras here, right?
I'm like, just like looking around while you're asking that question. First of all, when a white supremacist, colonialist, settler government decides to do anti-racism work, my first reaction is, like, for real? All right, all right. And then, did you read the plan? And I mean, I read that plan and I went through with like a big Sharpie and like, I was like, I'm gonna read through the whole thing. And then when I got to the part about helping Black people become better parents, I was like, goodbye, goodbye. I don't think it's effective. I think a lot of it is PR work and response to pressure from organizers inside Black communities. I imagine there's a lot of people who think that it's good that it brings the conversation into the forefront, or that we're now having these kinds of conversations. And I was like, first of all, who's we? Don't put me with y'all, okay? Second of all, I don't want conversations. I want action. Like, what are you gonna do about the overrepresentation of Black children in state custody? What are you gonna do about that? I don't want a plan that's like, improve, increase, all these work plan action words. You know, you're writing a grant, those are the words you use. I want tangible outcomes. And I don't think that it does that at all, frankly. And I don't know, I mean, I see it and I'm like, all right, y'all go clap and give yourselves some awards and have a special dinner and have Kathleen Ween come up and, I don't know, hand you a certificate. It has nothing to do with me. I don't know her actually though.
Okay, thanks everybody. So before we officially head out, I just need to say thank you to those of you in the audience. Thank you for showing up, for listening. Thank you to those of you who asked your questions and shared your personal stories. Thank you to all of our panelists, John, Kim, Huda, Ian, and a very special thank you to Miss Rania. Because if it was not for your leadership, we wouldn't be here this evening. So thank you so much for helping to organize this. We love you and can't wait to work with you more. And also, Rania, correct me if I'm wrong, but we are going to send out a survey for feedback?
Yes, you're gonna get a follow-up email with a survey for feedback, links for future events, all that wonderful jazz. Follow us on social media, especially me on Instagram. I'm the cutest person you know on Instagram. And take your garbage when you leave. You have anything else to say?
Also, a round of applause for the moderator, too.
Yeah. In the spirit of my Facebook posts, good night to everybody except the white supremacy. Get home safe, okay?